Morning, I'm Robert Iommazzo with SEBA International. I'm here in sunny Miami, Florida, attending and participating in the RiskMinds Americas Conference. I'm standing next to Barry Schachter, who is with 40 North Management. He is the CRO of this family office, and we'll be just chatting through some follow-up questions from his recent panel discussion that just concluded about a half an hour ago. Thank you for being with us this morning, Barry.
Pleasure. Thanks for asking.
Absolutely. So you were a part of a panel discussion that talked about emerging risks across the industry. Just to emphasize for the viewers here, and to organize that in a top-line fashion, what would you say and to emphasize are those emerging risks that we should all be aware of?
Sure. Part of what I'm going to tell you is kind of a précis of the conversation in general. A lot of discussion about the impact of regulation.
Yes.
And the challenges that faces. Some discussion about changes in technology, both in terms of like business risk, so emerging technologies, emerging competition, business risk, and some conversation about more ethereal things that aren't really so clearly manifest right now, which I think actually are more interesting in a way of trying to identify future threats that are not really well articulated right now.
Where do you see there's a tremendous amount of discussion, obviously on regulation, but also the cyber risk and cybersecurity piece. It's a bit hackneyed of a term, but do you see that in a family office as a threat to what you need to look at from an overall enterprise risk component?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, definitely, and it's you run into aspects of that. I mean, it's for us. It's not so much that we keep a lot of information in a way that's readily subject to security risk, but we have many discussions about do we have sufficient layers of security and access to our data, and so it's way up there on the scale of things that we're talking about.
And where would regulation be on that scale?
Well, I mean, as you know, on the asset management side, it's getting bigger.
Absolutely, yeah.
A lot bigger than it used to.
Yeah, the insurance firms I know are being labeled as SIFIs, and they're trying to dispute that down in Washington now.
Good luck to MetLife.
Exactly, I agree with you there.
Yeah.
The House always wins at the end of the day, other than the Hank Greenberg case.
If necessary, they'll change the rules.
Yes.
But I think there are things that we never would have talked about before. Form PF. Regulatory filings that are much more extensive than they used to be. So the possibility of SEC visits. So all of that stuff is taking up way more time. Not nearly, honestly, it's still not nearly the kind of drain on resources that my former sell-side colleagues talk about. But, yeah, a lot more.
Interesting. Well, I think we're seeing the pendulum obviously swing a bit more there.
Well, the IMF threw, in my perspective at any rate, the IMF threw a bone to the Fed in their review of the United States. In their they publish reviews of all of the member companies' financial stability, and the bone that they threw was. It's probably a good idea to have more oversight of the asset management industry, and I think that that's a weapon that the Fed could use going forward.
Yes.
I think.
Yes, it's interesting times because there was, as we've been reading, Goldman Sachs now entering the online lending. One of the comments I read was, "This is a direct result of over-regulation to a certain degree," and this firm now being very smart, saying we can make money doing straight vanilla type of product lending here. So creative times, creative thinking.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because that was one of the points that I made during the session as well, that like adaptive behavior is something that people don't take into account enough when they think about trying to manage risks. And so from a regulatory perspective, you impose certain constraints, but perhaps you don't think through what the changes those constraints will induce on the part of market participants.
And that brings me to my final question and commentary that I'd love to gain from you around the type of talent. What do you look for in your team? And it's not just the technical skills, as we had been chatting about, but being able to think strategically and what have you. But I'd love to just get your confirmation of all of this.
Sure, yeah, I appreciate that. So yeah, it's true that a certain level of technical skill is kind of a prerequisite, or it's a sine qua non. But then that has little to do with whether you'll be successful as a risk manager beyond that. I mean, in truth, though, the answer to your question is really dependent on what part of the risk management universe we're talking about. On the asset management side, it's kind of diverse because the role that risk plays differs from place to place. I think one of the points that Attilio made in the session we were in was that in asset management, risk is really embedded in the profit decision. That is, it's really, people really get that it's the opposite side of the coin, which is different from the banking space, right, where there's a lot of external pressure to have something called an independent risk function. So I think that, for it to be
embedded piece.
Yeah. And so I think for it to be successful in the asset management space, you have to go beyond all that technical stuff to ability to work with other people, to communicate well, to have good critical thinking and ability, and to be able to be convincing that you're playing a role that is a partnership role in the success of the business, and not a role that is a control function.
Right, more viewed as an internal audit type of function.
Yeah, I mean, part of it you could say is, showing that you're bringing something to the table.
Value, thinking, yes. Well, listen, thank you very much. It's always great to pick the minds of a great CRO, and do appreciate that this morning. And thank you very much.